French science fiction is a substantial genre of French literature. It remains an active and productive genre which has evolved in conjunction with anglophone science fiction and other French and international literature. History. Proto-science fiction before Jules Verne. As far back as the 17th century, space exploration and aliens can be found in Cyrano de Bergerac's comical History of the States and Empires of the Moon and Bernard Le Bovida, Fontenelle's Entretien sur la pluralité des mondes, Voltaire's 1752 short stories Micromegas and Plato's Dream are particularly prophetic of the future of science fiction. Also worthy of note of Simon Tissot de Petot's Voyages et Aventures de Jacques Massé, which features a lost world, La Vie, Les Aventures et le Voyage de Groenland du Révérend Père Cordelier Pierre de Messang, which features a hollow earth. Louis Sébastien Mercier's LAN 2440, which depicts a future France, and Nicolas C. Demieux Cuteristif de la Breton's La Découverte Australe par un homme volant, notorious for his prophetic inventions. Other notable proto-science fiction authors and works of the 18th and 19th century include Jean-Baptiste Cousin de Granville's Le Dernier Homme, about the last man on earth, historian Félix Bodin's Le Roman de l'Avenir, and Émile Souvaste's Le Monde tel qu'il sera, two novels which try to predict what the next century will be like. Louis Geoffroy's Napoleon et la conquête du monde, an alternate history of a world conquered by Napoleon. Cid Fontenay's Star Outsider Cassiopeia, an Olaf Stapledon-like chronicle of an alien world and civilization. Astronomer Camille Flammarion's La Pluralité des mondes habités, which speculated on extraterrestrial life. Henry de Parville's An Inhabitant of the Planet Mars, originally a hoax in the French newspaper Le Pays in 1864, about a Colorado oil prospector which finds a meteorite with a mummy inside that is believed to come from Mars. It was picked up by Jules Verne's publisher, who released it in an expanded book version in 1865. Achille Herod's Voyage to Venus, a story about humans who travel to Venus in an interplanetary rocket-powered spaceship, where they meet an utopian society. However, modern French science fiction, and arguably science fiction as a whole, begins with Jules Verne, the author of many of the classics of science fiction. After Jules Verne, the first few decades of French science fiction produced several renowned names of literature. Not only Jules Verne, but also Louis Boussinade, who was successor of Verne, Didier de Chaussy, who wrote Ignis, a novel where an inventor tries to tap the energy from the center of the earth in a dystopian society dominated by technology. Charles Diren, who wrote novels like Le Peuple du Pôle, where explorers find a secret alien society of technologically advanced reptilian humanoids who have evolved in isolation from the rest of the world for millions of years. Arnold Galopin, creator of Dr. Omega. Paul Devoy, author of the Vernian Voyages Eccentrics and creator of pulp heroes Lavrid and Dr. Mystère. André Laurie, another successor of Verne. John Antoine Now, who won the first Prix Goncourt in 1903 for his science fiction novel Enemy Force. Georges Laforêt-Namp, Henry de Graffigny, who sent the heroes explore the solar system in Les Aventures Extraordinaires d'un Savant Russe. Gustave Le Rouge, author of Le Prisonnier de la Planète Mars and Le Mystérieux Dr. Cornelius. Albert Robida, a writer and an artist, arguably the father of science fiction illustration. Maurice Renard, a Wellesian writer, author of Le Docteur Learn, Le Péril Bleu and Les Mains d'Orlac. J.H. Rosny, born in Belgium, the father of modern French science fiction, a writer also comparable to H.G. Wells, who wrote the classic Les Chiffres et la mort de literature. After H.G. Wells, The Time Machine was translated into French by Henry D. Davry in 1895 as the first of his works, soon followed by other translations of his stories, influencing French science fiction writers such as Maurice Renard. World War I brought an end to this early period, where the rapid development of science and technology during the late 19th century motivated the optimistic works of these early science fiction authors. The horrors of industrialized warfare and specifically the application of advanced technologies in such a destructive manner made many French authors more pessimistic about the potential of technological development. Between the two world wars, Rosny published his masterpiece Les Navigateurs de l'Infini, in which he invented the word astronautique. There were a few notable new authors during the period: Acute Gis Messick, for Quinsons and Gillet, José Moselli, for La Fin dia, Jacques Spitz, for La Guerre des Mouches, René Thévenin for Chasseurs d'Hommes sur l'After-Face du Monde, the latter under a pseudonym. After World War II, until the late 1950s, relatively little French science fiction was published, and what was published was often very pessimistic about the future of humanity, and frequently was not advertised as science fiction at all. René Barjavel's Ravage and Pierre Boulle's Planet of the Apes are widely known examples. This period of decrease of French science fiction is known to many as a golden age of English language and particularly American science fiction. When French science fiction began reappearing strongly after World War II, it was the themes and styles of anglophone science fiction which served as an inspiration for new works. The first genre magazine fiction, at first a translation of the American magazine of fantasy and amp science fiction, began appearing in 1953. The major genre imprint of the 1950s and 60s publishing translations of American novels was Le Rayon Fantastique, published by Hachette and Gallimard, and edited by George Gallet and Stephen Spriel. Nevertheless, Le Rayon Fantastique helped begin the careers of a number of native authors: Francis Carsac, Philippe Curvel, Daniel Drode, Michel Jury, Gerard Klein, Nathalie Henneberg. During 1951, publisher Fleuve Noir initiated Anticipation, a paperback series devoted mostly to French authors which released a steady series of pulp-like novels. Among its authors were Pierre Barbet, Richard Bessières, B.R. Bruss, André Caroff, Jimmy Gulliou, Gerard Klein, Maurice Limat, André Ruellin, Louis Thirion, Stephen W.U.L. Later, many major names of French science fiction were printed first by the imprint. Another series, Présence du Futur, was initiated during 1954 by publisher de Noël. Among its authors were Jean-Pierre Andrevin, Jean-Louis Curtis, Gerard Klein, Jacques Sternberg, Jacques Vallée. During this era, there was very little mainstream critical interest for French SF. French cinema, however, proved to be more successful for science fiction. Jean-Luc Godard's 1965 film Alphaville, a thriller and satire of French politics, was the first major example of French New Wave science fiction. Unlike American science fiction, space travel was not the major theme for the post-One 1968 French authors. A new generation of French writers, who had few memories of the horrors of the past two generations, were inspired by the transformation of France during the post-war era. Especially after May 1968, French SF authors wrote about political and social themes in the works. Authors like Michel Jury, Jean-Pierre Andrevin and Philippe Curville began to attract acclaim for the redevelopment of a genre which, at the time, was still considered primarily a juvenile entertainment. During the 1970s, comics began to be important for French SF. Metal Hurlant, the French magazine that spun off the American magazine Heavy Metal, began developing the possibilities of science fiction as a source for comics. Graphic novels are now a major, if not the major, outlet for French science fiction production today. During the 1980s, French authors began to consider science fiction as appropriate for experimental literature. The influence of postmodernism on literature and the development of cyberpunk themes catalyzed a new body of French SF near the end of the decade, the so-called Lost Generation. At present, French SF is particularly well represented by graphic novels, and a number of titles are printed annually. As in most of the developed world, magazine culture has decreased dramatically because of the Internet, but a number of French SF magazines remain in print, including Bifrost, Galaxies and Solaris. Despite the space opera revival of the beginning of the 1990s, the influence from English-language science fiction and movies has diminished considerably since the Lost Generation, while the influence of animation, video games and other international science fiction traditions has increased. The influence of Japanese manga and anime has also been particularly noticeable during recent years for graphic formats. Other notable French science fiction authors post-World War II: G. J. Arnaud, Idle, Pierre Bourdage, Serge Brusselot, Richard Canal, Maurice G. Dantec, Michel Demuth, Sylvie Denis, Dominique Douay, Catherine Dufour, Jean-Claude Dunyac, Claude Ekin, Jean-Pierre Fontana, Yves Freemian, Laurent Jeanfort, Philippe Goy, Johan Elliott, Joel Fusan, Emmanuel Juon, Serge Lehmann, Jean-Marc Liony, Xavier Mamejean, Michel Pagel, Pierre Pilote, Julia Verlanger, Elizabeth Voneberg, Roland C. Wagner, Daniel Walther, Bernard Werber, Joël Wintrebit. Literary awards. The Prix Rosniene is an annual award for French-language science fiction. Other awards for French-language science fiction include includes the Prix Apollo, the Prix Bob Moran, the Grand Prix de l'Imaginaire, the Prix Julia Verlanger, the Prix Jules Verne, the Prix Ozone and the Prix Tour Eiffel.